Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will talk about the HOA, which is against the fact that I am no longer part of the HOA. My phone buzzed toward the edge of the nightstand, doing that slow-motion cliffhanger slide that only happens during emergencies, or when you've made a terrible life decision. I grabbed it in time to see the caller ID, Community Office. For a half second in that foggy space where dreams still have voting rights, I wondered if they were conducting a late-night survey on mailbox paint sheens. Then I answered. "Hello?" I croaked. A crisp voice came back, too sharp for the hour. "This is Marla with the association. We've received reports that you have re-entered the premises after eviction. You need to leave immediately. Security is en route." I sat up. The room was unfamiliar, but mine. Cream walls, a skylight that captured moonlight like a bowl, the scent of new carpet still arguing with the lemon oil I used on the dresser. I reached for the lamp and took a breath. "Marla," I said, trying to keep my words inside their lanes. "I'm in my house. You do not have jurisdiction here." "You sold your house," she said. "Per the deed recorded last week, the association is the title holder. You are trespassing." I looked at the window. From my bed, I had a perfect diagonal view of a nearly identical house next door, the one I'd sold to the homeowners association. Signed, sealed, and escorted by a closing agent who was offended by how early I'd requested the meeting. The porch light was on over there because they'd never figured out the timer. A plastic notice flapped on that doorframe like a warning flag against common sense. "Marla," I said, "read your map. I sold you the house next door. I live at 1814. You now own 1812. 1814 is not and never has been in your association." There was a notable silence, like the pause before a toddler throws a tantrum or a kettle hits full boil. "That's impossible," she said finally. "All homes on this street are subject to the covenants." "That would be a neat trick," I said, "considering the plat map the county recorded in 1999 puts my new place on the other side of the boundary line. I checked before I bought it, twice." The silence returned, thicker this time. Then the tone sharpened. "Regardless, we have rules about overnight parking and your delivery truck is still in the driveway." So that's what this was about, the moving truck. My cousin Eli had parked it in my new driveway because we were hauling over the last of the big stuff, a dining table built from reclaimed bowling alley lanes and an upright piano that had survived 3 family generations and one spectacularly bad attempt at jazz. We'd finished at midnight. He'd crashed in the guest room. The plan was to return the truck by 9. "You can't tow a vehicle from property you don't control," I said, now fully awake. "It's called conversion when you mess with someone else's stuff. That's a civil tort. Also, it's 2:41 in the morning. Call me after sunrise." "You need to comply," she said. "Security will handle it. We can call 911. "Security doesn't have authority here," I said, "but the sheriff does. Should I invite him to this party?" Click. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear until the line stopped pretending to be a conversation. I looked at the ceiling, counted to 10, then did it again, because sometimes you have to repeat yourself for emphasis. Eli stirred down the hall, muttered something indistinct, and rolled over. I considered ignoring the whole thing. Then I pictured Marla, the association president who wore a visor to indoor meetings and referred to herself as the steward of community standards, sending a private security guard to wake up my cousin and try to hook a tow to a rented box truck that contained my grandmother's casserole dishes and a delicate stained glass lamp shaped like a trumpet vine. I got dressed. From the front walkway of my new house, with the cool night air prickling my arms and crickets working an overtime shift, the absurdity came into crisp focus. On the right, my old place, now a line item on the association's budget, stood silent. On the left, my new place, outside the HOA by something like 8 feet of legal boundary but a lifetime of peace, glowed with the kind of satisfaction that can only be earned by reading contracts thoroughly. To understand how we got to a phone call at 2:41 a.m., you need the prequel, the way every thriller starts with a quiet montage before the chase hits the highway. When I bought 1812, I did it knowing the neighborhood had an HOA. I'm not a rebel. I mow my lawn. I put the trash out on the right day. I am not the person who leaves a sofa at the curb and hopes it finds a home. The listing agent waved a lot of brochure language about community pride and cohesive aesthetic, and I nodded, thinking some structure keeps the hedges trimmed and the roofs matching. Fine. Then I met Marla. And I met the covenants. And I learned that there's a wide valley between reasonable and ridiculous, and our association had built a picnic pavilion right in the middle of it. It started with the mailbox. "Your mailbox is the wrong shade," said a notice tucked into my door like a flyer for a pizza place that doesn't deliver to your side of town. "Approved shade is antique bronze, satin, #0037. Yours appears to be aged bronze matte, #0038. The fine was labeled corrective incentive. I laughed, then I didn't. Next came the truck. I own a small remodeling company, licensed, insured, fully above board. I keep my tools in a trailer and drive a pickup, clean logo on the side, compliant with every rule I'd been given. The covenants allowed commercial vehicles so long as they weren't heavy duty. The definition of heavy duty hinged on a gross vehicle weight that was never specified. I sent a photo of the manufacturer's plate and offered to bring both the truck and my kitchen scale to the next board meeting to weigh it, if that would help. My email got copied into the minutes with the notation, owner argumentative. There were other things. They ticketed me for a garden hose left curled under a spigot. They sent me a formal warning because my front porch light bulb was too cool in color temperature, which was a new way to find out someone owns a Kelvin meter. They fined me for a seasonal flag that celebrated a sports team because it was too large. When I asked what was allowed, they sent a chart that looked like something a statistician might use to forecast harvests. By then, our conversations weren't conversations. They were skirmishes. I put my energy into facts. I'd quote the covenants back at them, highlight the sections I was complying with, and ask them to show me where I wasn't. It wasn't the path to friendship, but it kept the fines quiet. Then came the fence. My neighbor Priya has a small dog named Biscuit whose entire personality can be captured in the sound of tiny nails scrabbling on tile and a constant desire to be where the action is. One afternoon, Biscuit escaped a contractor's open gate, bolted toward the cul-de-sac, and nearly made a life decision under the wrong kind of machine. Priya cried after the near miss. I offered to help her put up a low fence panel between our yards. She said yes. We spent a Saturday installing it. It was, in my opinion, the least controversial thing a person can do in a backyard. On Monday, there was a citation taped to my front door for unapproved adjustment to perimeter boundary. The fine was not subtle. I called the office. Damon, the property manager, who always sounded like he'd been recently briefed, explained, per Section 9C, any fence requires prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It's 3 feet tall and inside the line on a survey, I said. It's literally to keep a dog from becoming street art. Nevertheless, he said, also, the approved fence picket spacing is 2.5 inches. Yours is 3. Because Biscuit is 3.5 inches, I did the math. Remove it or face escalating penalties. And that's when I did something I admit I enjoyed too much. I asked Damon for the Architectural Review Committee meeting schedule. He sent it. I showed up early. I brought a printed copy of the state property code, the covenants, and the county plat. I spoke exactly for the allotted 3 minutes. I described the life-saving mission of the fence and my picket math. Then I cited a clause in the covenants that I had highlighted 3 months before. Lots outside Phase 1 of the development shall not be subject to association architectural oversight. Phase 1, I said, pointing at the plat map, ends here. I traced a line. 1812. My house, then, is in Phase 1. 1814. The house next door is in Phase 2. And Phase 2, according to this addendum you recorded, never adopted the covenants. Marla shifted in her chair. That's a technicality, she said. It's the law, I said, because where I live, the law is just a very showy technicality. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that line, about the way a neighborhood can be a patchwork quilt stitched with invisible thread. The next day, I pulled up a listing I'd glanced at before, 1814. Same builder, same layout flipped like a palindrome, same mature maple in the front yard. No HOA on the listing because it had been carved out in that weird Phase 2 that never matured into a full adoption. If you stood in the street and squinted, you'd think it belonged to the association. But on paper, in the places paper matters, it did not. I made a call. The seller's agent had a buyer who'd fallen through. We met. The house needed minor work. I can do minor work in my sleep. I made an offer that wouldn't insult them but still kept me grinning. We went under contract. Then came the fun part. The association had a line in the covenants about right of first refusal. They could match an offer to buy a home to keep it within the community vision. I suspected that clause existed to keep out rentals or investors they didn't like the look of. But it cut both ways. I drafted a letter to the board offering my house to them directly at fair market value, highlighting the right of first refusal. I framed it as a courtesy. The truth was simpler. I wanted out, and I wanted them to be the ones who put their name on the deed and took responsibility for their own rules. Marla responded like I'd handed her a ceremonial sword. This is exactly the stewardship we expect, she wrote. The board approved the purchase faster than they approve Christmas lights. They used reserve funds earmarked for common area improvements, which hinted at a plan to turn my old house into a clubhouse or a rental space for events that involved catered fruit trays and arguments about hedges. We closed on a Wednesday morning. I signed papers at a title company office where a plant tried very hard to be a ficus. The association's treasurer signed across from me, pen trembling like it had been asked to swear allegiance. When I slid the keys over, there was a moment that felt like a magic trick. One house, two outcomes. Then I closed on 1814 that afternoon. The title agent's eyebrows went up when she realized the buyers on the morning file were the seller's next-door neighbors on the afternoon file. "That's new," she said, and stapled everything with gusto. We moved for 2 days. I changed my address. I switched utilities. I stood in my new kitchen on Thursday night and let a feeling I hadn't felt since childhood, uncomplicated relief, move through me. Then the phone rang at 2:41 a.m., and I was reminded that a line on a plat might be invisible, but it isn't imaginary. On the street, the association's security, a guy named Trent who used to park cars at a steakhouse, was leaning against a tow company truck, pointing at the rental box truck like he'd selected prey for the pride. He wore a shirt that said patrol, which was a big word for what he was allowed to do. I stepped into the wash of the streetlight and raised a hand. "You can't tow that," I called. "Wrong jurisdiction." Trent looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "We got a call from the president," he said, jerking his thumb toward my old house. "Says this vehicle's violating overnight rules." "That house is association property now," I said. "This is not. Move along." Marla appeared on the sidewalk like a cameo in a film no one asked her to be in, wrapped in a robe that looked like a cloud and determination that looked like a permanent expression. "We have standards," she said. "Our community does not allow commercial vehicles overnight." I took a slow breath because it was late and I didn't want to say the wrong thing and end up on the wrong side of a trespass warning. "Marla," I said, "I'm standing on a property that your covenants don't touch." I checked with the county recorder. I checked with the state law about associations and lot boundaries. You can't extend your authority across a boundary because you don't like the optics. If that tow hook even kisses my truck, I will call the sheriff, file a civil claim for conversion, and CC the association's insurance carrier so they can have a nice long talk with you about acting outside your authority. Trent's eyes flicked from me to the tow driver. The tow driver shrugged in that universal language that means, "Not worth it." The hook stayed put. "You're being unreasonable," Marla said. "I'm being lawful," I said, "and I'm being polite at 2:41 a.m., which is more than I'm required to be." "Then at least remove the for sale sign," she said, pointing at the signpost in front of my old house. "It lowers property values." "That's your house," I said. "Remove your own sign." I walked back to my porch. By sunrise, the tow truck was gone. Trent had retreated to wherever patrols go when there's nothing to enforce. The neighborhood went back to its usual morning soundtrack. Coffee machines, garage doors, a lone jogger who looked like he had a standing appointment with a podcast about time management. I brewed coffee and texted Priya. "If you hear someone trying to tow a piano, it's a misunderstanding." She texted back, "Are you okay?" "Fine," I wrote, "just learning new hobbies like property law at lunar hours." At 9, I returned the rental truck with Eli. When we pulled into the driveway again, someone had taped a bright orange notice to my door. "Notice of eviction," it read, in letters so large they'd never fit inside a fact. I read the first paragraph, then the second, then the part where they'd cut and pasted from an online form that clearly assumed the writer was a landlord. It cited sections of our state's landlord-tenant statute so incorrectly that, if it had been a student essay, I would have advised the student to try baking instead. It demanded I vacate association property within 24 hours. Eli whistled. "They're bold," he said. "They're confused," I said, "but bold confusion is a dangerous genre." I took a photo. I peeled the notice off and put it in a folder labeled Evidence, which I keep both metaphorically and literally. Then I did what I always do when something moves from aggravating to unacceptable. I made a plan and I wrote it down. Plans, like fences, keep tiny things from getting underfoot. Step 1. Confirm boundaries. I drove to the county property appraiser's office, where the receptionist had bangs with the kind of personality you only get from consistent routines, and cats who demand tuna at 5. I asked for the plat maps and the most recent deeds for both 1812 and 1814. She printed them, stamped them, and slid them across the counter like a croupier. Step 2. Consult an attorney. I'm not the sue first type, but I know where my rights end and my patience ends, and sometimes they end at the same place. I booked an appointment with a property attorney named Tess, who had the kind of measured voice that makes panic forget its own name. Tess looked at the documents and nodded. "You're correct," she said. They have zero authority over 1814. If they attempt to act like they do, tow a vehicle, shut off utilities, threaten eviction, they're acting ultra-virus, outside their powers. That puts the association and possibly individual board members at risk for personal liability, depending on your state statute and whether their insurance covers willful misconduct. Keep documenting. Step 3. Notify law enforcement in case Marla got creative. I'm not talking arrest warrants creative. I mean call for a wellness check because someone saw you carry a large bag of laundry into your house creative. I stopped by the sheriff's substation and asked to speak to whoever handled community disputes. A deputy named Coach, I don't know if that was his given name or his vibe, listened to my 3-minute summary like a man who has heard everything twice. If they call in something bogus, he said, we'll send someone, but we'll be aware. If they step on your property making threats, call us. If they try to tow, call us. Also get cameras. Step 4. Boundary signage. I ordered 2 tasteful metal signs that said private property, no trespassing, SRS section, state statute number, because sometimes it helps to put the chapter and verse on the altar. By noon, I'd done everything that didn't involve a courtroom. I ate a sandwich that had more mustard than sense and sat on my porch with a notebook, because sometimes sitting on your porch is a political act. Priya came over with Biscuit, who immediately attempted diplomacy with my ankles. Marla knocked on my door, she said, rolling her eyes. Asked if I'd seen you carrying furniture into association property last night. What did you say? I asked. I said I saw him carrying a lamp into his house and I gave him cupcakes. This is a peaceful pastry zone. Bless you, I said. The rest of the day passed in a series of small, unruly moments. A board member named Ron, who looked like he'd built his entire personality around polos, walked slowly past my driveway twice, pretending to check the streetlight. Damon sent an email with a subject line that included the phrase compliance opportunity, asking me to attend a special meeting to discuss my status. I replied with a request for the statutory basis for their belief that they had jurisdiction over my property. He did not reply. At 5 p.m., the sprinklers on my old lawn came on with a little victory dance of arcs and drops. I watched them, feeling a kind of tender grief you only feel for grass you used to pay to fertilize. Then my doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was a courier holding a thick envelope like it contained either a settlement or a recipe for disaster. Inside was a notice of hearing for an emergency board session scheduled for the next morning, with an agenda that included unauthorized occupancy at 1814 and security protocol enhancement. The notice cited a section of the covenants that allowed emergency meetings to preserve community safety. At the bottom, someone had handwritten, "Please attend to clarify your understanding of your status." I poured myself tea I didn't need and read it again. Then I called Tess. "They're moving fast," I said. "They're moving wrong," she said. "If you're feeling energetic, you could send a cease and desist tonight, citing your property rights, their lack of jurisdiction, and the state statute that prohibits associations from enforcing covenants on properties not subject to them. Include a line about harassment and potential claims for slander of title if they post anything else about you being evicted. Then, if they try anything at that meeting, we talk injunction." I wrote the letter. I kept it lean and specific. I cited the plat. I cited the recorded covenants. I cited the state's Owners Association Act, the section about the boundaries of enforcement, and the requirement that associations act within the scope of their recorded authority. I included a line that said, "Any further interference with my property, including attempts to tow vehicles, post false notices, or misrepresent my ownership status, will result in immediate civil action, including but not limited to claims for conversion, trespass to chattels, slander of title, and harassment. Consider this a formal demand to cease." I printed it, signed it with a flourish I felt I'd earned, and hand-delivered copies to the association's P.O. box and to Marla's front door, where I slid it underneath so gently you'd think it was a love letter. At 7 p.m., as the sky shifted to that shade photographer's chase, my phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize. The voicemail was short. "This is Damon," it said. "We got your letter. We'll see you at 9 in the morning." I slept deeply for the first time in a week. If there's a specific weight to knowing your lines are drawn and the script is in your favor, it's somewhere between a heavy quilt and the memory of passing a test you studied for. At 8:30 the next morning, I walked into the association's clubhouse, my old living room, because they'd apparently decided that if they owned my house, they may as well use it for meetings. Marla sat at the head of the dining table with papers fanned like playing cards. Damon perched with a laptop. Ron wore another polo. possibly the same one. Two other board members who had names that always seemed to slip off my brain, maybe Kara and Ben, sat with matching mugs that said Community First. Half the neighborhood filled the chairs. Priya sat in the back with Biscuit, who was disguised as a purse dog. Eli was next to her, arms folded, face communicating the specific look he reserves for bureaucrats who try to tow his family's pianos. Marla opened the meeting with a speech that sounded like she'd workshopped it in a mirror. "We are here because we have an issue of community safety," she said. "We have an unauthorized occupant who refuses to comply with standards." I stood up. "Before you go further," I said, "you should know that any words you say now misrepresenting my status on my property could be grounds for slander of title. I am recording this. State law allows me to record this, and I have delivered a cease and desist which you acknowledged receiving." Marla's smile thinned. "Sit down," she said. "I'll stand," I said. Damon cleared his throat. "We have maps," he said, turning the laptop so the room could see. He'd pulled up a Google image with a cartoonish red rectangle around the entire cul-de-sac. "This is our community." "That's a picture," I said. "This is the law." I held up the stamped plat map and the recorded covenants with the book and page number. "Your authority stops at the Phase 1 boundary. 1814 is Phase 2. Phase 2 never adopted your covenants. The county recorded that 26 years ago. You can't fix it with a highlighter." "We have always applied our standards to both sides," Marla said, with the confidence of a person who thinks habit is a synonym for permission. "Then you have always been overreaching," I said, "and now you've recorded a deed to 1812 that proves you know where your property ends. By the way, you might want to check your right of first refusal clause. Using reserve funds for this purchase without a member vote, that's another issue." A murmur spread across the room, a sound like wind through dry leaves. Damon typed fast. "We followed procedure," he said. "Then show me the member vote," I said. "Show me the notice. Show me the section in your bylaws that allows using reserve funds for property acquisition. If it's there, I'll be quiet about that part. If it's not, I won't." Priya raised her hand like we were in the world's worst classroom. "I'm not in the association technically," she said, "but I'm in the neighborhood. And I'd like to say that watching someone get a 2:41 a.m. call about an eviction from a house they legally own felt like watching someone try to play basketball with a spatula." Eli leaned forward. "And if anyone lays a finger on our truck," he said, "I will personally wheel it onto your lawn with a crew of very enthusiastic movers. We do deadlifts for fun." "I'm calling order," Marla said, although she wasn't convincing anyone the concept applied. "We will be issuing a final notice. If you don't comply, we will place a lien." "You can't place a lien on a property not subject to your covenants," I said. "If you try, it's void. If you record it anyway, it's slander of title. That's a lawsuit. Also, filing false documents can crank open doors you don't want to peek behind." A man in the third row, who I only knew as the guy who always edged his sidewalk twice, stood. "Marla," he said quietly, "do we actually have authority over that house?" Marla didn't answer. Damon didn't either. Silence did what it often does in rooms like that. It unmasked the truth, and that's when the meeting shifted from theater to consequences. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You will stop harassing me. You will not tow any vehicle from my driveway, step onto my porch without consent, or post any false notices on my door. You will inform your security contractor that 1814 is outside your jurisdiction, and that they may not enter my property without invitation. If I receive one more notice, or if anyone connected to you interferes with my property, I will file for a temporary restraining order and seek damages for harassment and slander of title. Additionally, I have prepared a complaint to the state agency that oversees community associations regarding your misuse of reserve funds to purchase 1812 without a member vote. If that is in fact what you did, I am prepared to send that complaint today." The room inhaled. Marla pressed her lips together until they disappeared. "You are making enemies," she said. "I'm making boundaries," I said. "They tend to be more durable." I sat down deliberately. Somewhere behind me, Biscuit sneezed, and a ripple of laughter escaped and then settled, as if the room remembered it was full of actual neighbors with morning routines and kids and dogs and patio furniture they'd spent too much on. "The board huddled for longer than it takes to agree on a pizza," Damon typed. Marla read over his shoulder. Ron stared at his mug like it would offer advice. Finally, Damon looked up. "We will take this under advisement," he said. Meeting adjourned. It was the closest thing to a retreat I'd seen from them. We filed out. On the front lawn, my old front lawn, a cluster of people formed, the way people do when they're deciding whether to stay quiet or talk. Priya touched my arm. "You handled that," she said. "No," I said. "The law handled that. I just said it out loud." By noon, no new notices had appeared. By 3, I'd received an email from Damon with a single sentence. "We have notified security that 1814 is not under association jurisdiction." I printed it. It went into the evidence folder. I took that as a quiet victory and used the afternoon to do something ordinary. I replaced a crooked cabinet hinge. I taught Eli how to adjust the water heater temperature because he had a habit of boiling himself. I lay down on the floor with Biscuit and told him he was a good boy, which he already knew but appreciated anyway. The quiet lasted until Friday when the mail came. Wedged between a catalog and a flyer advertising a mobile car wash was a white envelope marked Association. Inside was a friendly reminder that my trash can had been visible from the street for an excessive duration after pickup. I looked at the date. The reminder corresponded to Tuesday. The trash had been at the side of my new house, 1814. In its customary position. I stared at the letter and wondered if the printer ink in their office smelled like stubbornness. That was the moment I decided to stop being reactive. If they were going to persist, I was going to escalate, not with volume, but with precision. I called Tess. I called the sheriff's deputy. I called a friend who worked in insurance claims and asked for help reading an association policy. Then I sat down and began to write a different kind of plan, one that didn't just protect me, but changed the pattern that had everyone on the block checking their porch lights for violations of vibe. I didn't plan to become the neighborhood's reluctant paralegal, but Friday's friendly reminder about my trash can was the nudge that made a plan click into place like the last tooth on a zipper. Step 1 of the new plan was information. Every time Marla waived the covenants, she counted on them being thicker than patience. Fine. I filed a records request under our state's nonprofit laws and the association statute that requires open records for members and affected parties. I wasn't a member anymore, but I was very much an affected party, 2 feet outside their sandbox with a front row seat to their shovels. The request included board minutes for the last 2 years, bank statements for operating and reserve accounts, contracts, including security, legal invoices, notices to members, any vote tallies, emails to vendors that mentioned me or 1814, and because petty can be productive, anything with the subject line trash. Step 2 was a complaint to the state agency that oversees community associations. I wrote it like I'd want a complaint written if I were the person reading it on a Tuesday before lunch. Short facts, clear attachments, specific statutes. I alleged misuse of reserve funds for the purchase of 1812 without a member vote, ultra-virus enforcement attempts on 1814, late-night harassment, and potential slander of title via the bogus eviction notice. I attached the stamped plat, my deed, the cease and desist, the 2:41 a.m. call log, and the orange notice. I copied the association's registered agent and the board. Step 3 was a conversation with my insurance claims friend Mira, who explains everything with sandwich metaphors. "Directors and officers coverage is like a deli," she said. "You're covered if the sandwich you made for the association falls apart in your hands. You're not covered if you make a sandwich with ingredients you stole from someone else's kitchen. Acting outside your authority? That's the stolen mayo." "So if they tow my truck without jurisdiction," I asked, "that's the stolen mayo?" "That's the stolen mayo," she said. "And using reserve funds without authority? That's raiding the deli's emergency cash drawer to buy throw pillows. Adjusters do not love throw pillows." I drank that in like good coffee, and step 4 made me smile. Community. The board expected me to argue alone like a crank. So I didn't. I started on foot. Priya, whose fence saved Biscuit's life, was in. Keegan, the sidewalk edger, had been fined for a bird bath labeled a water feature. Joe, a teacher, got dinged for a half-drawn roller shade. Eloise, a retired nurse, was cited because her geraniums were unsightly after rain. None of them were loud. All of them were tired. We hosted coffee on my porch. I made cinnamon rolls that looked more ambitious than they were. 10 neighbors came, then 12, then more, drawn in by Biscuit, who believed the meeting was about him. I rolled out the plat map like we were planning a heist. I explained the boundary line. I explained reserve funds. I explained that you can like tidy lawns and still demand lawful leadership. "I didn't know we could see bank statements," Keegan said. "You can," I said, "and you should." "I'm not trying to take down the whole thing," Joe said. "I just don't want to fear forgetting my trash can." "That fear isn't community," I said. "It's control." By noon, we had signatures to force a special members meeting on the purchase of my old house, a motion for an independent audit, and support to recall the board if misuse was confirmed. I coordinated but didn't lead. Eloise gathered more signatures. Keegan canvassed the far cul-de-sac. Priya drafted the audit request. Joe promised cookies. We weren't soldiers. We were neighbors who knew our property lines and our limits. Saturday afternoon, Ron, the polo loyalist, knocked. Up close, he looked like he hadn't slept. "I joined to keep the lawn clean and the pool open," he said, "not to measure porch light color temperatures. I warned about the reserves. Marla said it was allowed. I didn't want to be the only no." "Did you vote?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I regret it." He slid me an envelope. Draft minutes of the emergency vote to buy my old place. 4 yeses, 1 abstention. Damon warning about exposure, and Marla saying, "We'll fix the paperwork later." Justice stretched its legs. Sunday, community standards reminder flyers appeared, now defining the association to include Phase 2, as if ink could rewrite a recorded plat. Eli laughed until he had to sit. "They think bullet points beat recordation," he said. "They don't," I said. Deputy Coach called. The board wanted a civil standby for a peaceful eviction at my house. He told them no court order, no dice, and reminded them about false reports. At 8 a.m., 2 patrol cars parked quietly at the street entrance. A tow truck drifted by, then away. Damon drove past twice. Nothing happened. In neighborhood terms, that was a parade. At noon, the records portal opened. Plenty of gaps, plenty of gold. Bank statements showed a transfer from reserves capital projects to operating 2 days before the purchase. Legal invoices referenced post-purchase replat research. Security billed special patrols at 1814. Monitor compliance. An email from Marla said, "We cannot allow him to set a precedent. If we lose 1814, the others will think the line is optional." Damon replied, "The line is not optional, it's recorded." By Tuesday, our petition had enough signatures to force a meeting. I filed a supplemental complaint with the state, attaching the reserve transfer and the emails, and notified the D&O insurer, Mira's idea, practically guaranteeing an adjuster would call the board with that "find every receipt and a chair" tone. Wednesday, my doorbell rang. A woman with a leather portfolio introduced herself. "Callie, outside counsel for the association." We talked on the porch. "I'm not here to argue boundaries," she said. "You're correct. 1814 isn't under the covenants. On the reserves? Concerning. I'm advising a member vote to ratify or unwind the purchase. We shaped a settlement. Cease enforcement against 1814. A written apology. Reimbursement of my attorney's fees, security retraining, a public correction, an independent audit, and, if misuse was confirmed, a recall. I added a written acknowledgement to every member with the plat map. Phase 2 isn't subject." She nodded. Friday's members' meeting, held inside 1812, the house they'd bought, felt like a reckoning. Hands shot up. Why no member vote? Why an emergency? Why patrol houses we can't govern? Ratification failed by a mile. The audit passed by an avalanche. Kara moved for a recall, ballots to be mailed, but the tone shifted. Callie read a statement acknowledging Phase 2's independence, ending enforcement against 1814, reimbursing my fees and issuing an apology. The apology arrived the next day, hand-delivered by Damon, looking lighter. "I should have pushed back," he said. "Take a vacation," I told him. Security was replaced. The audit showed reserves moved without a vote, and a visioning fee to a board member's cousin marked non-compliant. Fixes. Reimburse reserves. Change policies. Refer misuse for review. The recall succeeded. Marla was out. Kara became president. Ron stayed, newly resolute. A new manager arrived, speaking fluent statute. The state's order required training, policy repairs, restitution to reserves on a schedule, and a modest civil penalty for trying to enforce outside jurisdiction. Tess finalized our settlement, including boundary signage at the entrance and a survey day to stake the Phase 1, Phase 2 line, polite as spray painting stop here. 1812 became a well-managed rental for a young family. Marla moved 2 towns over, visor and all. Side quests bloomed. The Biscuit Barrier landmark, porch light swaps, curb number fundraisers, Trent back to parking cars. At 2:41 a.m., Ron whispered, "New policy, member vote for reserves, mandatory board training. Every citation must quote the section. Letters to Phase 2 acknowledging no authority." We framed the retraction, celebrated the consent order, and later, during a water main break, shared towels and flashlights. Community. Unweaponized. If your midnight caller insists you're evicted from a house you legally own, remember, statutes exist for days like that. Maps don't bend. Neighbors will show up for cinnamon rolls and truth, and consequences can rearrange furniture into something that looks like a community again. Friends, thank you. See you soon.